I believe for roll call, Mrs. Johnston is on Zoom, so everyone is present tonight. So we'll begin the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Like to announce that the board met in exec session prior to this meeting to discuss the legal matter, to discuss contract negotiations, and to discuss actually two personnel matters. And before I go on with that, one thing I did not do at the last meeting is welcome Mrs. Rhodes to and I apologize, but she's taking over. She's board secretary at this point, so welcome. But we had a short meeting the last time, so that give you that, but welcome with it. Next thing, if I could, I'm requesting, could I have approval of the agenda for tonight's meeting incorporating additions and deletions, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Maris. A second, please.
Second.
Thank you, Names, Mr. Garber. Any questions? All those in favor? Mrs. Johnson?
She is, but I don't have a thumbs up, a hands up, or anything from her.
Okay, then motion carries 8-0 at this point. Next would be approval of the minute, excuse me, approval of the minutes for the regular school board meeting held on July 9th and the minutes of the Buildings and Grounds Finance Committee meeting held on July 30th, please.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Maris. Second, please.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Any questions? Okay, all those in favor? Okay, nothing. Okay, so motion carries 8.
Just give a thumbs up. 9.
Okay, motion carries 9-0. Thank you, Mrs. Johnson. Recognitions, there's no student council members here. Any staff?
Staff and students, so I'll share this in the superintendent report, but we're welcoming staff back on Monday, the 19th. We did start with new teachers today, or on Monday, and I encourage all of you, Dr. Dandridge provided you with the information for Thursday afternoon to meet with our new staff who we hired as a little reception for them at the end of the day, if that works with your schedules, to be able to celebrate and recognize them. And at the end of the month, we, at this point, hoping all goes well, we'll be able to honor our state baseball champions at our first home football game. So looking forward to that.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, residents' requests to address the board. The board provides a time for public comment for residents and taxpayers to bring their thoughts to the board, but is not a time for exchange between the board, administration, and the speaker. We ask that speakers refrain from identifying specific students, staff, or community members by name. Residents and taxpayers who are interested in making public comments must complete the electronic registration form prior to 3 p.m. on the day of the meeting. And I believe we have 3 requests to address the board this evening. Mr. Graham.
Our first speaker this evening is Jennifer Meyer, who will be followed by Dr. Kathy Furman.
I hope all of you have had a wonderful summer, and all of my fellow community members. It's been eventful but fun. I cannot wait for school to start. It is 9 days, not quite 13 hours. I'm not counting down at all. But I'm here to first sing praises for our faculty. From my personal experience, I have a daughter going into 2nd grade and one going into 3rd grade at LPC. So I'm very familiar with the teachers at that institution, but also from secondhand experience, my friends who have kids in the community in different schools, different ages. Everybody loves Hempfield. It's a really good school district. And I'm here to ask the board to support the teachers and give them the competitive salary that they're asking for, but I'm going to kind of logically work my way through this. So I'm going to start by saying, imagine that you excel at your job and you ask your boss for a raise. you work after your contracted hours, you work at night, you email people at 11 PM because I want to hear back from you right away. Sounds familiar? Our teachers do this. So you excel at your job and you ask your boss for a raise, and not just to reward you for a job well done, but really just to keep up with the cost of living. We are all aware of how expensive groceries are. Like, this is not a new thing. Now imagine that your boss denies you that raise or gives you a much smaller amount, doesn't even cover the cost of living. Most people, if they feel that they're worth more than that, are going to update their resumes and start looking for a new job, right? That makes sense, right? If you had a friend who was working their butt off and they said, oh man, my boss just won't give me the raise. I haven't had a raise in 4 or 5 years or whatever. You tell them, find a new job, find a place that will appreciate you. Because the way that businesses and schools show their appreciation to teachers is financially, right? Monetarily. That's what it comes down to. So there seems to be a bit of a misconception that Hempfield teachers are some of the highest paid teachers in the county, but this really isn't true. So last month, I wasn't able to attend the finance committee meeting, but I was able to look over the documents. And there was data presented on the teacher's salary, which was great. And I'm glad that they presented that. However, I didn't think the data was presented very properly. And I say this as a scientist. I'm someone that works with data. I work with large sets of data, hundreds, if not thousands of lines of data points that I have to put into some kind of visual representation to show non-scientists what I'm talking about. So while my area of expertise is not teacher salaries in Lancaster County, it is in showing data. So this is the graph, really one of the best visuals that was from that presentation. And it says at the top, historical average salary. And at the bottom is Hempfield, and it's a little hard to see. I know it's I don't have the screen to put it up there, but the bottom is Hempfield. And looking at this graph, it looks like, wow, Hempfield has the highest. Hempfield's the biggest, right? What this graph is showing is cumulatively how much money Hempfield has spent on salaries over the past decade, over the past 10 years, since 2013. So, okay, if that's the question you're asking, how much have we spent in the past 10 years? This is a great graph to look at. But if we're asking the question, what do our teachers make today compared to the other schools in Lancaster County? Then this graph is not very useful at all. In fact, it's kind of misleading. So using the data from that presentation, Hall et al. Is the author. They're the ones who gave the presentation. I made up my own graph. So I basically took a table of numbers that was presented to you because, quite frankly, tables of numbers are really hard to understand. I put it in a visual representation. That's all I did to it. And what we're looking at here is the average Hempfield salary compared to other Lancaster County school districts. So on the y-axis, we have rank from 1 being the highest to 15 or 16 being the lowest. And the years from 2013 to 2024. And so you can see in the early part of that 10-year period, we were number one and we were attracting number one talent. But today we're at number 5. So right now we are 5th highest. So first misconception, hopefully I put to rest. If we're looking at average salaries, we are 5th highest in the county. That means there are 4 other school districts. If our teachers are frustrated with not feeling like they're compensated, there are 4 other schools for them to look to. So I'm running out of time here. So to sum up, give the teachers what they're worth. We don't want to lose them. We don't want to lose this excellent program that we have. Thank you.
Dr. Kathy Furman will be followed by Ernie Small.
Good evening, Dr. Kathy Furman, West Hempfield Township. Thank you for allowing me to address the school board tonight. Since January of this year, I've been communicating with Mr. Bermierski about Hempfield Policy 109 and the written administrative procedures for the selection of school library materials that the policy directs the district to adopt. Last year, in May 2023, when I made public comments about the revision of Policy 109, I shared that these written administrative procedures would determine if the rights of students would be impacted. I appreciate that Mr. Bermierski shared the procedures titled Hempfield School District Library Collection Management Procedures Administrative Regulations with me in February. After reviewing the procedures, I had both concerns and questions. Myself and another community member have been communicating with administration since March to get these questions and concerns answered and addressed. Last week, I brought our concerns to the attention of the board in an email. Many of those questions remain unanswered, and several of the concerns have not been addressed by Mr. Ramirski or the board. We believe that portions of the procedures not only are in conflict with Board Policy 109, but also do impact student access to material. The community, and specifically the Hempfield High School students, were assured last year that there would be transparency of the implementation of the new Board Policy 109. That includes the collection management procedures. These new procedures have now been in place for one school year. I think we all need to ask why our questions and concerns are not being addressed, and why our questions and concerns are not being answered, and why there appears to be a lack of transparency. In the school year since this new procedure has been in place, we have been asking, among other questions, if there are books that have been recommended by the school librarians but were not approved for purchase, and if so, the titles of those books and why they were not approved for purchase. We are asking for transparency. Again, as we've offered, we are more than happy to meet with administrators and school board members to discuss these questions and concerns. I will also reiterate, as I have in the past multiple times, that the Hempfield School District has certified school librarians who are trained and have the expertise and the experience to select and maintain material for their school library collections, and to provide Hempfield students with a stellar school library program that meets the information and reading literacy needs of all students. I implore the administration and the school board to recognize these award-winning school librarians for their expertise, knowledge, and training. All Hempfield teachers deserve to be recognized and paid for the impact that they have every single day on every single student, not just for 180 school days, but the impact that they have on a lifetime with these students. Thank you.
And Aaron Small will be our final speaker this evening.
Good evening. Thank you to the board and administration for the opportunity to talk to you tonight. I'm looking forward to a new school year beginning and wanted to come back to share an update on the school funding issues that I've spoken about in public comment before. I know Mr. Bramerski will be speaking to this topic during a presentation tonight, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but I wanted to thank the members of the board and the community who reached out to lawmakers this year to advocate for increases in funding to public education. And I want to say how glad I am that many of the recommendations of the Basic Education Funding Commission made it into the finalized budget. In particular, I'm pleased to report that the concept of adequacy and equity credits were added to the budget as a Ready to Learn grant. This means that our state lawmakers recognized and acknowledged that there is a need to bring all districts up to adequacy in funding, and adopted at least the first year towards making this long-term goal possible. These grants do have accountability measures tied to them, meaning these funds must be used for enhancing academic programs or supportive environments. Starting in 24-25, this coming school year, changes made in the basic education funding include resetting the base year to the 23-24 distribution and using the latest 5-year estimates from the American Community Survey. And that will define poverty, median household income, and factors like that. The BEFC was increased $225 million statewide in student-weighted distribution formula to continue sustained investment in school district basic education programs. So what that means is Hempfield will get a significant increase in revenue in this year's budget. We did not get a significant increase in basic education funding as was initially proposed in the governor's budget, but increases to special education funding were more than the proposed amount. In all, Hempfield stands to gain $2.3 million more in revenue than they did the year before. I'm interested in hearing the plans for allocating this additional revenue. I'm hopeful it will not all find its way to capital reserves, but instead is allocated to support programming and resources in a way that directly benefits our students. Both the basic education funding and special education funding should be used to provide services and curriculum to improve student outcomes. While these are excellent gains and we should be excited about what happened in the budget negotiation process this year, there's still more work to be done to make sure that full and fair funding is a reality across the state. We need to continue to ask lawmakers to make investments in public education. This year's increases are only a first step in closing the adequacy gap. We need the state to change the timeline for approving their budget so that school districts know how much revenue they will receive each year. And mostly, we need to advocate that the state lessens the burden on our local taxpayers by providing consistent and adequate funds. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you to all our speakers. Mr. Bomarski, turn it back to you for the superintendent's report.
Thank you and good evening again. Thanks for everybody for coming out tonight. As I shared already, we welcomed our new staff on Monday. Our new staff go through 3 days of orientation, beginning their induction program if they're brand new to the profession. And we will conclude on Thursday with a celebration for them. So again, if you're able to come, you don't need to let us know. You just need to show up, and that will be at the high school on Thursday in the large group room. So if you want to go in on the Franklin side of the high school, you'll see it's a straight shot right to the LG. Also, as we're getting ready, our teachers have been in getting ready, and we have an official room prep day on Friday for staff who haven't been in yet, but our staff have been coming in, have been getting rooms ready. Parents and students have been able to find out their schedules, their bus routes, times for bus pickups. All of that information has gone out. I want to thank all of our community parents and community members who have signed up for all of the electronic updates. One big jump and push that was done this past year was around transportation. We're really pleased to report we have a very high percentage of our families who can get that information electronically now. And so if there's any changes instantly, we're able to push that out, which is great. When it comes to filling positions, we are in good shape all around from a district. We are still looking for several positions in terms of the support staff, custodians, food service, paraprofessionals, and we have a few teaching positions that our teams are still interviewing for, some last minute leaves and or openings that have occurred that we will keep working on, making sure that we get filled and have individuals in for day one. Our buildings are looking phenomenal thanks to our custodial and maintenance teams. And just a lot of work has gone in the summer getting ready for the upcoming school year. You've heard an update from Mrs. James on the maintenance department regarding the work that was done in several of our buildings, and all of that has been done very successfully. So there's a lot of good things happening. We will kick off on Monday, the 19th at 8 a.m. with our staff in the Performing Arts Center. As a board, you are certainly welcome to come. We are doing things a little different this year, hoping in future years that we'll have a little greater flexibility when it comes to the schedule, but the state mandates 3 hours of safety training for all staff, not just teachers, not just administrators, but all staff. And our opening day is the one time where we have everybody together. So we're going to try this year to get all of that training done on day one. And then hopefully in future years, once we get this going, then we'll be able to use the schedule a little differently moving forward if we can. But again, it is the one day we have everybody together. So we're looking forward to that kickoff. The Hempfield the Education Foundation, Scott Bishop, the executive director, will be there also to announce our grant winners, which he has done for the last several years. So we'll be doing that and welcoming our staff back. Also, want to share in terms of a state budget update. Mr. Graham, if you can push that up on the screen. If you go to the next slide, just to share, appreciate a community member who shared this, but as we've talked to you before, we must pass our budgets by June 30th, period. That is the same at the legislature, up in the state. However, there's no teeth there. And so historically, budgets have not always been passed on time, and we don't know how much state funding we're going to get. And as a result of that, it has been our historical practice to flat fund our state revenue line item in the budget because we don't know what those numbers are going to look like. We have shared that with you over many years. This year, the state budget was passed and signed on July 11th. And so from July 11th on, we were getting information. So Mr. Graham, if you can go to the next slide, and you will see a breakdown of the additional dollars, starting with the basic education funding, otherwise known as the BEF funding. Happy to report that as part of the school code, they reset the base. So our new base was based off of the 23-24 school year. And so you see that in 24-25, we received just under $700,000 of additional basic education funding. As has been talked about in the past through budget discussions at finance committee meetings and through budget development, the board has shared and expressed their wish that any new funding in terms of basic education funding goes to the capital reserve. So that 700,000 is something that has been, that's new money. So that continues to be the board's wish. That is what will happen. Special education funding, we received $433,000 of additional funds to go towards special education. We know our special education numbers continue to rise, the costs continue to increase, so that money will help offset additional special education costs if needed.
Mr. Bomersky, follow up on that.
Yep.
So the budget that was passed by the board this year fully funded all of the special education requests that the administration made.
Correct. Correct. And
So what, I'm a little bit confused about what the
Yep.
plan is. My understanding was that the agreement with the board was that any incremental state money was to go to capital reserve. And I do not recall the board making distinctions between BEF and any
Right.
other.
So
breakdown.
I'm just walking through this just to share, and then I'll get to the bottom total. So I will get there in terms of from a
Right,
special ed
but your-
standpoint.
The language over here,
Correct.
the right margin is slightly different.
Correct.
For each category.
No, I get that. And so when we look at end of the year, when we close out the budget, if our special education budget has exceeded what we were projecting based on whether new students are moving in or costs have exceeded, we have dollars that the state has provided for special education that we can apply towards that or use fund balance to do that. So I'm just sharing there from a special ed standpoint, that would be wise in my opinion.
So are you proposing that we create another fund?
Nope, I'm just sharing that by the end of the year, we will know if if we have this dollars, you either go to special ed or you go to the capital reserve, which is what the board had talked about. But if we have additional dollars in special ed from a expenditure standpoint that wasn't budgeted, to me, it would make sense to use those special ed dollars as the state allocated them for, which was special education.
Okay.
Mr.
Thank you for that
Bomersky.
clarification.
Yep.
Mr. Morrissey, just for the whole board, if you remember last school term, Dr. Mustard came to us because we needed another, I think it was a speech pathologist, because our numbers went up. So again, that's not budgeted in here. I don't think anywhere, we used to have in our regular budget, a reserve
Correct.
thing, and that was totally
So
removed.
that's what I'm getting at, Mr.
Yes.
Nava. I just want to know. The bullet point was a little
Yep.
ambiguous here. If we're just saying we're just gonna keep that as unbudgeted funds in reserve that we can deploy as we need, that's a conversation we can have.
Mhm.
But I think a reasonable reading of the second bullet point is that we are taking this and increasing the special education budget by $433,000.
No,
And I think that's a discussion that we'll want to have. in a
Funding
full
that's coming.
I'm saying that's additional funds, and I would recommend that should go to special ed if there are increasing costs. So if I could have reworded that differently, I can do that.
Can I ask a
But
clarifying question on that
Sure.
as well? The money that's coming from the state for special ed funding must be used for special ed funding and nothing else?
the state allocates the funds and they say you get X amount for basic education funding, you get X amount for special education, and then it's up to us to make sure that we're using those dollars. And so if our special ed budget is on budget and there's no deficit there, then that extra dollars for special ed would end up going to our reserves.
It can be used other places?
Yes.
Okay.
But for right now, what I'm saying as I'm going through all of these, I'm going to get to the subtotal, and that's additional dollars that's coming from the state for things. I'm just saying if there are additional costs in special ed over the course of the year, it would make sense, from my opinion, to say the state gave us extra special ed dollars. Let's use those special ed dollars for special
The
education.
state hasn't stipulated it has to be used.
So
for special
they give it for special ed, and we should use it for special ed.
I have
If-
a question.
It's there.
I have a question, but if we don't need it for special ed, what's the plan from the administration, I guess?
Well, from the board, the direction was any additional funds from the state excess of our budget goes to capital reserve.
I wasn't on the board when that decision was made, right? Okay, Because that just, I mean, just saying that out loud, saying special education funds should go into
Yeah.
a capital, sorry, can you hear me? Saying special education funding that we got extra from the state should go into our capital reserve sounds bonkers.
But I'm not saying that. I'm
Just saying
saying
that out loud.
Right, I'm saying if at the end of the year, we have exceeded our budget in special education, I believe we should be using those special education dollars for our special education budget.
And
Yeah, that's
I
what
mean,
I'm saying.
most likely, I think people who pay attention to that, it will
Right.
exceed that.
Yep.
But if it doesn't, that other option
Yep.
just seems crazy.
Is it accurate to say that our special education budget exceeds the 4.991 million that the state allocates to us?
Yes,
And so, in essence, it's a shell game. We are spending more on special education what the state gives us. And I
Correct.
think that's the important point
Correct.
here, that these dollars that the state gives us, whether we take taxpayer dollars or the state dollars, it's all the same bucket of dollars. We are spending that money plus some on special education and on basic education. So whether we allocate this money or other money and we move this money over, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. They are going for what the state allocated them for.
I think Mr. Walden was exactly right. Mr. Mamuski, I understand what you're trying to do here, and I respect
Yeah.
that, but this is a distinction without a difference. This is incremental money that's coming into the budget that we weren't expecting, and the board has already instructed that incremental money goes to capital reserve. Now, the board can change its mind, but the current instructions of the board are that incremental dollars from the state go to capital reserve.
I'd like at some point, and maybe it's not this meeting, to revisit that, because I think we're getting a lot more here than we ever anticipated when we do normal year-to-year flat funding. From one year to the next, there's so much, and okay, that's an amount we can kind of get our head around, and that's a good budget amount to go. But if we're getting a much higher amount than we're expecting, I'm all behind our need for capital reserves so we can work on our building funds. But I also feel like there's places throughout the district we can grow as well in academics that funding could go to as well. So
And-
that's something I think I
No,
could
and that's a
revisit.
legitimate point that the board can discuss, but that's just gonna be dollars that aren't available then for a renovated high school, for a new
Absolutely.
elementary school.
But there's a
We
lot
can
of,
only spend each dollar once.
I agree, and there's a lot of day-to-day needs that need to be met as well. So I'd like to rediscuss that before the money is deployed.
I'm never in favor of spending money just because we have it. I think we need to be fiscal responsible regardless. Where I would have a problem with this is if we were spending $4 million on special education and there were needs, and we were putting almost $1 million in a capital reserve. That is not the case here. We are spending far above and beyond what the state gives us for special education. And at the end of the day, just because they give us dollars does not mean that we just find a way to spend them.
so if I can just finish, I'll get to the subtotal, which I'll be able to address all of that. The Ready to Learn block grant, you see what we get, and we've received that $689,000 historically. We are receiving an additional $680,364. However, there are very specific requirements that the new budget and code have outlined as to what those dollars can be used for. Those dollars must be used for programs within schools that show a significant impact on student learning. So within that, we must apply for those dollars and we must indicate how we are going to use those dollars. And so one of those options, as we've been going through that list, is when you look at curricular programs. And so while the district used some ESSER dollars and a good amount of it for the elementary reading program, there were still district dollars that are going to be needed, and that was already shared. So our recommendation is to use that $680,000 towards that elementary reading program to fill in for those other non-ESSER costs. But we have to apply for that. And again, that cannot go anywhere else other than to those specific things. The cyber charter funding, there's two lines there. Unfortunately, while a lot of negotiation was happening at the state level, they did not settle on a standard state rate for cyber education students, which we thought was going to happen. And all signs indicate that it was, but it was walked away with at the last hour. and eliminated from the budget. But they are giving some funding back. So we will get 221,000 to help potentially offset some rising charter costs. However, the second line item there, the 73,000, that has to do with the change in calculation of numbers and costs per student, but that's not going to start till January. And so that's an estimated cost based on prior numbers. So we're not going to really know that true total. But in the end, there is an additional $2.1 million that we will be receiving that is in excess of state funds. And I'll get to the safety grants in a second. But as Mr. Donato asked, or actually shared, we do not have any reserve built into the budget. There is no discretionary line item that we took that out several years ago. So as we look at from a budgeting standpoint, before any dollars are moved into capital reserve, you have to take action to actually make those moves. So things will be brought to you through the course of the year with these dollars. And as we're looking at budgets, we'll be bringing things back to you if we're seeing an increase in things like special ed or other areas. And then what do we do with those dollars? So that'll be discussion starting at finance committee meetings and then moving back to the full board. The safety grants that are up there, we did receive grants in the past. The safety grants for 24-25, $226,750. Those grants do have restrictions on how those dollars can be spent. And every year, it seems like the expectations of those grants change. So what we are in the process of currently doing is going through the revised state expectations when it comes to safety and security, physical security and mental health within schools to look at, are we at least meeting level 1 expectations? And so we are going through the revised documents because we need to go through those documents to determine if we find an area that is not at level 1 or higher, we must use the $226,000 towards anything that is not at least a level 1. So for example, when you look at safety and security entrances, people coming into our buildings, I've shared with the board that we are in the process of waiting for the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency to give us approval to shift how we were using dollars in a previous grant to upgrade the cameras and intercom system at all of our entrances of our schools. When you look at the safety and security criteria level 1, there needs to be clear access and the ability for visitors to be screened coming into the schools. And that was for us something that we were seeing concerns with some of the instruments that we were using to do that. And we wanted to upgrade that equipment. So we reached out and said, can we reallocate those dollars? And here's why. You have to be able to lock all doors from the inside. I've had conversations with you about that as well. So there's a whole series of criteria. On the mental health side, we're required to use the student assistance program, which we do. So as we're going through all the criteria, we will look to see if anything does not meet level 1. We'll share it with you if there's any safety concerns, as we always would. But I also have shared with you, as we've been seeking grants to expand our SRO program, I've shared that we would seek any additional grant funding that we receive to help offset those costs, at least at the onset of that program. So as we go through it, our initial thinking was, unless there's significant changes on the level 1, we're in good shape from a level 1, that we would recommend beginning to look at using those dollars towards our SRO program. If there's any additional dollars left over, we would then evaluate what would be needed from a safety and security standpoint. So in the end, we are getting additional dollars. There are dollars that have very specific restrictions attached to them, and then there are dollars for the district to decide how they're going to use it based on board direction. So I wanted to just provide that information. If there are any other questions, I'm happy to take them now. If there's any discussion around how to use the funds, I would recommend taking that back to the finance committee as a starting point. If there's a different direction to them for discussion meeting, to then bring back to the full board.
So just so I understand, the Ready to Learn block grant and the safety grants have a specific way that money is used.
Correct.
The rest is up to the administration and board.
Correct.
Thank you.
And if I could just get clarification for myself and everyone else, any excess money, nothing gets automatically put into
Unless it was in the budget when it was approved
a
to
line
do
item
that.
for the budget.
Correct.
Right, but everything else, if we were going to put it into capital reserves, it would come to us first. that were
Correct.
extra
So
funds.
in this year's budget, Mrs. Hall, 6259%. Yep. So that
That
was
was
in the budget.
budgeted.
That money will move because the
Right.
board already approved that.
Right.
Any additional funds, we would be then bringing back to the finance committee to then the real
Okay.
regular board meetings for that board approval.
Thank you.
Anything else?
And also, excuse me, more for the public, like the basic education funding money, the $17 million, it would be nice, but we don't get that, like they don't mail us a check. It's randomly spread out through the school year, and there's really not even a rhyme or reason to when it's sent to us.
Yeah, historically, we're on 25-26% of state funding when it comes to our budget, 1% on federal. Everything else comes from our taxpayers.
Anything more on the court case about funding? Where's that at? Is there any update on that, Mike?
No, so the legislature agreed upon this budget and that's what was passed. It's not, I'm sorry. It's not what was in the majority report in terms of what they were proposing. And it was hard to kind of tell in the minority report how much we would get because they didn't provide tables in terms of what the school districts, there were certain things they agreed upon. They did reset the base, which is good. But no, there is nothing else that we
Is
have
there anything
received.
more planned with that court case and those reports, or are we done?
The judge in that case directed that the legislature, the governor's office, the Department of Education needed to come together to figure out how they're going to fund education in the state of Pennsylvania in a constitutional way. And so the question's going to come up, I think, this is just my opinion at this point, whether or not any movement that occurred will be deemed appropriate or not, but that's not by us. That's through cases going to the courts.
Because it's just 1 year.
It is just 1 year. There is the possibility that some of these dollars will continue, but we will not know until the next budget is passed.
And I think that's an important point, that these are not guaranteed year over year.
No, that's why we have to keep pushing as a board to our representatives that this is an important thing because we are part of a local school district. So it just means we have continued work to do year after year if it becomes just a yearly thing, because that affects our local taxpayers who then, and all of us in this room are local taxpayers. That affects us. So we just have to, because it was just a year of funding and it isn't guaranteed, we have to continue that work on behalf of our district.
And it may have been successful because if for the 7 years I've almost been on the board, I believe this is the first time that our representative has actually approved the state budget with the increased funding for education.
I think we heard it.
The only other pieces that I have, you have the calendar of events and you have the enrollment report. In Friday's board news, you will also see a little more detailed breakdown of that enrollment report based on by building and grade levels. And that concludes the superintendent's report, unless there's any other questions for me.
And Mrs. Johnson, since you're out there, do you have any questions? I didn't reach out to you.
Sorry, I had to unmute. No, I don't have any questions. Thank you for the discussion, though.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Moving on to the president's report. I have a statement to read. The Hempfield School Board and the Headfield Education Association continue to negotiate toward a new collective bargaining agreement. Progress has been made in some areas. However, there's still much work to be done. The board understands that the Hempfield community has questions about the current status of negotiations. In an attempt to answer many of these questions, the district will be posting information about Hempfield's most recent contract, the one that ended in this past school year, its budget, recent tax increases, and other relevant details on its website beginning tomorrow. The board may provide additional details as negotiations proceed. The board is grateful for the hard work and dedication of the Hempfield faculty and staff. We look forward to a successful beginning to the 2024-2025 school year on August 22nd. And we'll move on to the representative and adjuncts reports. Lancaster County Career and Technology Center, Mr. Keener.
Thank you, Mr. Donato. The JOC did not meet in July. The next meeting will be on August 22nd.
Okay, thank you. IU 13, Mr. Maris.
Nothing new to report. We did not meet in July either. We have our August meeting tomorrow evening, which I will be attending.
Thank you. Penfield Rec Center, Mrs. Brady.
No, I have nothing new, Mrs.
Okay.
Brady. I'll defer to you.
The last general meeting of the board was on July 23rd. Much discussion around the strategic planning. They are in a lot of the same phase as we are here with looking at feasibility studies and planning for the years ahead as far as not just programming, but property. And it's a long range. Nothing's going to happen in the short term dramatically. They're working with a recreation consulting firm called Ballard King and looking at the different ways that the programs at Hempfield Rec can continue to serve the community and work with the community. One of the things is looking at the way we as a district, as well as future developments in the various township parks, how they can all sort of talk to each other, if you will, so that we aren't duplicating efforts and facilities, but maximizing use for all of the community. Their budget, first draft of their budget is due in November to, I believe, to the townships. And the other news, and I can't say that I know whether this has been resolved yet, but it was announced that their school-age childcare director had resigned for very good reasons for him, but it's a loss for the rec center. So I believe that position is likely still posted or being opened for candidates there. And our finance committee meeting is next Wednesday morning, which I will attend.
Any questions? Okay, moving on, safety and security, Mr. Garber.
Nothing new to report.
Thank you. PSBA, Mrs. Eshelman.
No, I was just saying that I had read a lot about the ongoing, what are they called? The safety grants, which I knew we had worked on before, but that those are continuing, and I had an update from PSBA about that. So it was nice to kind of just keep that conversation going as the new funds from the state came in. And I also got information about student representatives for PSBA. I didn't know that was a thing. It's just another opportunity for our Hempfield students. And I think all of us agree when our students are here representing, it's awesome. So I can look more into that if anyone in the Hempfield community is interested, because how cool would that be?
Okay, thank you. Going on standing committees, buildings and grounds, Mr. Maris.
Yes, Buildings and Ground and Finance Committee met on July 30th. As far as Buildings and Ground, Mrs. James provided an update, paving and concrete for Roarstown and Mountville. Things are going well. Should be completed within the next 2 weeks. Is that still correct? So it sounds like they're almost done. All right. And they came in approximately 11,000 under budget, which is good news. Boiler and chiller projects for LMS and LPC are in place, and they were supposed to be completed around August 7th or 8th. Did that occur? Okay. And that is all we talked about. Our next meeting will be August 27th.
Any questions? Finance, Wagner?
At the Finance Committee meeting, Mrs. Hall presented an updated financials, and we also went through some contracts that are on the list for approval tonight. And then one other point that I wanted to mention was we did approve the engagement letter for Myers, Patsy and Associates LLC to perform our audit for the fiscal year ending June 30th of 2024. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Education and programs, Mrs. Johnson.
We did not meet this past month, excuse me, so I have nothing new to report. Our next meeting is Thursday night at 5 o'clock.
Thank you. Policy, programs, and legal, Mr. Keener.
We also did not meet in July, and as Mrs. Johnson just said, the next meeting will be this coming Thursday at 5 o'clock.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to personnel action items, need a motion to approve personnel action items B and C. B is goes from 1 through, I believe it's 9, 11, thank you. And the other thing, C, is the people that, staff members who run the events going on, whether it's sporting events or other events.
Motion to approve.
Thank you,
Second.
Mr. Wong. Second, thank you, Mrs. Eshelman. Any questions? Okay, all those in favor? Mrs. Johnson? Thumbs up. Okay, motion carries 9-0. Next is to approve personnel action item D, returning substitutes. I will be abstaining from that vote because my wife is on the list as a returning cafeteria substitute. So that's why it was taken as a separate motion. So need a motion to approve that.
Motion.
Thank you, Mrs. Brady. Second.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Garber. Any questions? All those in favor? Whoops, I'm abstaining.
I'm
Can't
going
be
to
in
abstain
favor.
too because my daughter's on that list, so.
Okay. All right, so motion carries 7-0 with 2 abstentions. And then last one, E is approval of Lori, and I won't even try your last name, as Director of Business Operations, Marchese. Thank you. Should have had you read this.
Not at all.
As Director of Business Operations for the Hempfield School District effective September 4th.
Motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Wakamuth.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor? Okay. And I believe the motion carries.
Did Mrs. Johnson vote?
Yes.
Motion carries 9-0, and I believe she's in the audience.
Lori is here tonight, so Lori, welcome.
Welcome. And moving on to financial items. Motion to approve financial items B through F, which are the contracts, the reports for the district, the reports for food service, financial transaction, and the incentives for the support staff to maintain and hire support staff as needed.
Motion approved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, Mrs. John, motion carries 9-0. There's no buildings and grounds action items. And final thing, approval of other action items B through E, which is the second reading of, I believe it's 2 board policies, our attendance officers for the upcoming school year, additional transportation staff, so we get the kids to school on their buses, and the transportation routes that the bus drivers will be driving.
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Keener. Second.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Any discussion? Okay. May I see vote to approve, please? Okay, I believe that carries. Motion carries 9-0, and then a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. A second.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Mr. Marison, Mr. Wagner, all those in favor? Okay, motion carries 9-0, and we are adjourned.